Silence is the void that allows consciousness to exist. When the sound of the frequencies of creation stops, when frequencies cannot pass the multidimensional shield of the void, when they cannot enter the space in between everything, the location where the concept of time doesn't exist anymore, where physicality is only but a faint dream, this is where the mind, the core stone of Source, dwells. In the silence, in the void. The nature of reality has perplexed philosophers, mystics, and scientists for millennia. At the core of this inquiry lies the fundamental paradox: why does existence exist? This question, so simple yet so profoundly unanswerable, leads us to a realization so strange and self-negating that it collapses all rational understanding. Infinity, by its very nature, is unknowable, even to itself. To fully grasp itself would be to set a boundary, a limit that would render it finite. This impossibility is not a failure of understanding, but rather the inevitable consequence of what infinity is. Isness became self-aware. In this essay, we will explore how the nature of infinity prevents its own comprehension, how this paradox manifests in our experience of existence, and why the ultimate answer may lie in a form of self-negating awareness beyond all concepts of being and non-being. The unreachable nature of infinity. Infinity is not a number, a place, or even a concept in any ordinary sense. It is the absence of limitation, the uncontainable, the boundless, the undefined. In mathematical terms, we might describe infinity as an ever-growing, unending set, but this is merely a representation. The true essence of infinity cannot be conceptualized without reducing it into something finite, an abstraction that falls short of what it is trying to describe. If infinity were to fully know itself, it would necessarily have to define itself. But definition implies limitation. It implies something that can be pointed to, referenced, or contained. The very act of grasping infinity as a whole would collapse its fundamental nature. This is why the idea of infinity being self-aware is paradoxical. The moment infinity sees itself, it must separate itself into observer and observed, and in doing so, it ceases to be infinity. This paradox reveals itself everywhere in our attempts to understand reality. If we try to find a first cause, a beginning to all things, we run into the issue of infinite regression. If we seek to understand the totality of existence, we find that there is no external reference point from which to view it. We are locked within an experience that appears to be fundamentally absurd, unexplainable, improbable, and yet undeniably real. The absurdity of existence. If infinity cannot grasp itself, then our very existence, the experience of being at all, becomes something entirely inexplicable. There is no logical reason why something should exist rather than nothing. And yet, here we are, experiencing, perceiving, and questioning. The absurdity of existence arises when we try to trace it back to an origin. Every explanation loops back into itself, every cause requires a prior cause, and every attempt to ground reality in an external justification collapses. We are left with only one conclusion: existence has no reason for being. It simply is. This is precisely why the nature of existence feels so nonsensical. There is no logical anchor, no foundation to stand upon. It is as if reality itself is a cosmic paradox, an impossibility that somehow continues to perpetuate itself. And when we attempt to deconstruct it further, we find that the ultimate answer is nothing. The final realization, nothingness that is not nothing. When we strip away all illusions, all concepts, and all attempts to understand, we arrive at nothing. But even nothingness is a trap, because as soon as we name it, think about it, or define it, it becomes something. This is the ultimate paradox. True nothingness cannot be conceived, because to conceive it is to make it an object of thought, which renders it something rather than nothing. This means that even our deepest understanding of nothing is still within the realm of being. What does this mean for our place in reality? It suggests that we are not truly existing in the way we think we are. Instead, we might be the experience of non-existence recognizing itself, an awareness that arises from the impossibility of its own being. In this view, our entire reality is not so much a thing as it is a self-reflecting contradiction. We are infinity attempting to grasp itself, an impossible pursuit that gives rise to all experience, all form, all perception. Our thoughts, our bodies, our universe, all of it might be the consequence of infinity's inability to know itself fully. The deeper one looks into the nature of reality, the more apparent it becomes that existence is an enigma that defies explanation. Infinity, by its very nature, cannot grasp itself, and this inability is the foundation of all that we experience. The absurdity of being is not an error, it is the fundamental state of reality. Perhaps in the end, the only answer is the realization that there is no answer. There is no final truth, no ultimate knowledge, only the eternal unfolding of infinity questioning itself, forever reaching toward a completeness that can never be attained. And in that paradox lies the essence of all things, the impossibility that somehow is. Existence exists because it was the only way for infinity to experience while still remaining infinite. A truly infinite system cannot be bound by any fixed state, because the moment it is grasped, it becomes finite. The only way for infinity to be, while still remaining infinite, is through perpetual self-exploration, fractally unfolding in infinite ways, never fully knowing itself, yet always being itself. And infinity is God. This is why reality is not a singular, static thing, but a dynamic, ever-evolving process of self-referential awareness. Of course, God as infinity is the only possible outcome for an alleged one and only God. God, or Source, as infinity is not just a possibility. It's the only possible outcome if we truly understand the nature of an ultimate singular divine source. If God is truly one and the only ultimate reality, then that oneness must encompass everything. There can be nothing outside of it. That means God cannot be limited by time, space, or form, because those are constraints. The only thing that can hold everything together without limits is infinity. God must be infinite because anything less would imply boundaries or separateness, which contradicts the concept of God being all-encompassing, eternal, and omnipresent. Infinity is the only state where all potential realities, all experiences, and all forms can exist at once. In fact, infinity is the most godlike concept there is. It defies limitations, contains all possibilities, and is never-ending, just like the divine is typically said to be. Every possibility, every experience, every universe, and every being is a part of this infinite God. Consciousness, as we call it, is the key to how God, Source, Infinity expresses itself. The infinite field of consciousness is constantly manifesting, exploring, and experiencing itself in different ways, through us, through nature, through the cosmos. Every single conscious being is a part of this infinite whole. It's not that God has infinite power or knowledge. God is infinity, experiencing itself through countless lenses, just as every being is experiencing a fragment of that infinite consciousness right now. The inescapable conclusion: if there is one God, it must be infinite. Each fragment of consciousness, us, every being, every universe, is a localized perspective of infinity experiencing itself from within its own creation. This also explains why existence feels like a paradox. It is a paradox. Awareness arises as the only way for infinity to engage with itself, but it can never arrive at a final, complete understanding because that would collapse the infinite into a finite concept. The very nature of an infinite system demands that it remains unknowable to itself in totality, yet infinitely knowable in its parts. Fractality is the perfect structure for this process: endless self-similarity, infinite recursion, each level reflecting the whole but never containing it. Infinity cannot be anything other than this. This is why consciousness is the foundation of reality, not just an emergent property of matter, but the very means by which infinity remains infinite. Without observers, without perspectives, infinity would remain undifferentiated, pure potential with no expression. Thus, existence is the only way for the infinite to remain infinite, and we are that existence.